What if the final wish of a king wasn't to crown his heir, but to change everything we thought we knew about royalty? What happens when tradition is no longer enough to protect an ancient institution? And how does a family known for its silence handle one of the most personal and unexpected announcements in its history? When Princess Anne shared King Charles's final request, it wasn't just a message, it was a turning point. A quiet earthquake beneath the polished floors of palaces and centuries of order. It caught everyone off guard, especially Prince William and Prince Harry. The words shook the royal foundation, not because they were cruel, but because they were brutally honest, forward-thinking, and painfully necessary. As King Charles's health continued to decline, his body slowed, but his thoughts grew sharper. The crown, once a symbol of unshakable authority, had become a burden that weighed heavier with each passing day. No longer was it enough to rely on lineage or ceremonial pomp. Charles had seen the fractures within his family, the distance, the tension, the repeated failures to communicate, and he understood something few kings ever admit. The monarchy, as it was, might not survive him. For decades, he watched traditions being passed down like antique furniture, polished and admired, but no longer useful in modern life. And though the title of king gave him immense responsibility, Charles knew his time was running short. He didn't want to be remembered as the man who wore the crown after a beloved queen. He wanted to be remembered as the king who dared to question what that crown actually meant. He could have told anyone, his advisors, his wife Camilla, even his eldest son William. But he didn't. Instead, Charles turned to the one person in the royal family who had always told him the truth, even when it was difficult to hear, his sister, Princess Anne, and who had never chased the spotlight, who had worked more royal engagements than almost anyone, who had never asked for applause. Her loyalty was quiet but unwavering, her sense of duty fierce and real. Charles trusted her not just because she was his sister, but because she would carry his message without twisting it into something more palatable. That message? It wasn't a coronation plan. It wasn't a farewell speech. It was a deep, deliberate shift in royal values. Charles didn't want William to simply take over. He didn't want a monarchy that continued to function like a well-rehearsed play, with actors in place and lines memorized. He wanted change. Real change. He wanted responsibilities to be shared, not just among the next in line, but across the family in a way that made sense for the future. No more rigid hierarchy. No more backup heirs waiting in the shadows. This wasn't about punishing Harry or rewriting the past. It was about learning from it. When Anne spoke to the family, the room was still. Her voice didn't shake. Her tone didn't beg for agreement. She was there to deliver, not to persuade. And what she delivered was Charles's belief that the royal family had to evolve or risk becoming irrelevant. The traditional roles, the stiff expectations, the silence in the face of crisis, those could no longer be the guiding principles. It was time to lead differently. Time to stop pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Charles had seen how the crown could isolate people. He had lived through years of internal unrest, watched his sons grow apart, and buried the queen, who had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders with little complaint. In many ways, his vision was inspired by the history of the very institution he now led. The abdication of King Edward VIII in 1936 had nearly brought the monarchy to its knees, placing an unexpected burden on Charles's grandfather, George VI. That event changed the course of royal history, ultimately giving the world Queen Elizabeth II. But even her legendary reign was marked by tension and quiet sorrow. Charles watched his mother devote her life to duty, often at the expense of happiness. He saw what that kind of sacrifice looked like behind the closed palace doors. And he never forgot it. So, when Elizabeth died in 2022, it wasn't just the loss of a monarch, it was the final goodbye to the old world. Charles stepped in, but with eyes wide open. The public was watching closely. Trust had been eroded by scandals, interviews, and very public family feuds. Charles knew that wearing the crown wouldn't be enough. He needed to make decisions that hurt now but might heal later. His cancer diagnosis made that even more urgent. Mortality has a way of forcing clarity. And Charles saw that clinging to tradition without purpose would only drag the monarchy further into isolation. William and Kate began to take on more, not because they were forced to, but because Charles had quietly started handing them the tools. Kate, always graceful, began appearing more frequently, taking on projects that mattered to the public, standing in for events where her presence could reassure and inspire. It wasn't accidental. It was intentional. It was the beginning of a slow and careful transition, one not just of power, but of values. But in the background, one relationship kept the entire foundation steady. Charles and Anne had shared their lives since childhood. Born only 2 years apart, they had experienced the same upbringing, the same expectations, the same pressure to smile and perform. Yet they turned out so differently. Charles was sensitive, introspective, and was no-nonsense, sharp-witted, and fearless. And perhaps it was those differences that made them inseparable in a way few understood. They didn't compete. They complemented each other. When the world saw one, the other wasn't far behind. And while cameras focused on younger royals or more dramatic stories, Charles and Anne quietly remained each other's anchor. Their bond was never about attention. It was about loyalty and trust. Anne didn't need Charles to explain himself. She already understood. She didn't sugarcoat the truth, and he appreciated that more than anyone else ever could. Through divorces, scandals, and the shifting tides of public opinion, they leaned on each other, silently but steadily. When Charles became king, Anne didn't push for a spotlight. She pushed for stability. She became his constant, his advisor in everything but name. And when he needed someone to carry his final thoughts, he didn't hesitate. He chose Anne. Not William, not Camilla. And, unlike many other royal relationships, theirs wasn't tangled in jealousy or fragile pride. It was built on decades of shared moments, from the innocent laughter of childhood to the sobering realities of adulthood. They had weathered every kind of storm together, never needing applause or permission. When Queen Elizabeth died, they stood side by side, grieving not just a monarch, but a mother. In the months that followed, Anne's presence gave Charles the strength to step into a role that was always his, but never easy. She didn't just represent the old guard. She embodied the bridge between old and new. Now, as the royal family continues to adjust to the aftershocks of Charles's message, there's no denying that his wish changed everything. It wasn't just a call for unity, it was a roadmap for survival. By reshaping roles and responsibilities, by being honest about past failures, by trusting the one person who had always stood by him, Charles may have ensured that the crown he wore would mean something more than ceremony. It would mean progress. Harry's exclusion from the new plan wasn't a punishment. It was a difficult, calculated choice meant to prevent more pain, more chaos. Charles acknowledged his youngest son's importance, but understood that inviting more instability would weaken the very thing he was trying to protect. It was a hard truth, one only Anne could deliver with the grace and strength it required. And so the monarchy, once steeped in unbending tradition, stands at a new threshold. One where the roles are less about titles and more about service. One where unity matters more than bloodline. And one where the legacy of Charles and Anne, rooted in love, honesty, and shared duty, will continue to guide the family through an uncertain future. If you found this story as moving as we did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt updates and inside stories from the world of royalty and beyond.